It's great to see everybody. And my only hope is that you could be here with here in North Hall on this beautiful eve of Halloween coming up this weekend. And 83 years ago this month, North Hall burned to the ground. There's so much history in this building and in the spirit that I have come to believe after more than 40 years of accounts being told to me, the spirit of Emma Guffey Miller residing in North Hall. I want to start. Thank you very much to Kelly Bailey, the Alumni Association Board of Directors, who support programs like these for alums, faculty, staff, students, and I appreciate their attention to every detail. I also want to give a shout out to Samantha, a student employee in the Alumni Association, who helped greatly with the development of this presentation. This is going to be a three-part presentation, and I'm going to work very hard to make sure that the presentation flows quickly and smoothly. The first part is going to be on the building itself, North Hall, because the building Kelly and I are in, socially distant from each other, is the third version of North Hall. Actually, if you really wanted to count one more, we would be in the fourth version of North Hall. So this is not the building that was one of the three founding buildings of the institution. But the second part of the presentation will be the woman, Emma Guffey Miller. Who was this woman? And how did she come by so much and authority and connection in her 95 years of life? And thirdly, I think the one we're all wanting to hear about, why does Emma Guffey Miller love North Hall? And according to more than 100 accountants told to me over 40 years, why does she continue to love North Hall? And why does she love it so much that she will never leave? We're going to start with the building North Hall. And the very first slide you're going to see the original three buildings. And North Hall is the building on the left, the very large structure. It actually looks like a block. Albert Maltby, our second principal and the longest serving principal and president of the university, described it as a barn, but it was where the large percentage of women attending State Normal School at the time actually lived. So North Hall was constructed in 1888, opened in 1889, and housed the women of our 168 students who attended the institution that very first semester in 1889. That building in 1894 was transformed from its L shape to an E shape by adding two more wings off the back to accommodate the surge in population that was taking place after this place called the Normal School at Slippery Rock was gaining in enrollment very quickly. So that building then in 1894 had two more wings coming off the back of the building. Well, in 1895, crisis struck Slippery Rock State Normal School with the burning of South Hall. And that was the only boys' dormitory, burned to the ground in 1895. In 1896, the very next year, the chapel, the wooden structure that you see on the screen to the right of North Hall or to the south of North Hall, burned to the ground as well. Albert Maltby is now in 1896 left with 2/3 of his structural having burned to the ground. The good news was South Hall was replaced by a beautiful brick building and the chapel replaced by what was described by so many over the years as the most beautiful building in Butler County, a beautiful limestone building with more than 100 glass windows. Well, Maltby was very concerned that this wooden structure, North Hall, the only remaining original building, would also burn. So at the end of that 1890 decade, they used brick to completely cover North Hall, except one wing. The wing that you are actually looking at on your screen on the left-hand side was not covered in brick because of the expense at the time. So as we go to the next slide, we will see the new North Hall, which is version number 2, which moves from that barn style of building to a building with 4 architectural styles. And why 4 architectural styles? Well, typical committee decision. There was a committee assigned to investigate the best architectural style. They could not come to agreement, so they decided all 4 architectural styles should be included in the building. And that's what we have in the new North Hall. This picture would have been shortly after the 1900. You see a little slice of the main building on the left-hand side of the screen. What you don't see is behind this large tower, Roman tower on the left, is a wing that is wood frame from the original building. And that was a concern to the Council of Trustees for years, a concern to the presidents for years. But the lack of money, lack of capital funding, unfortunately kept the building in the state that it was. If we go to the next building, this may show you the south side of North Hall on the left and that beautiful chapel that housed almost all of the student activities at the time, where students went to chapel daily, and they also participated in a number of theatrical presentations and student activities in the chapel. Here you see graduation taking place. And the next slide, you're going to see North Hall in its red brick style. And again, you'll see those 4 different architectural styles. But it was that building that in 1935, Emma Guffey Miller, who was newly appointed to the Board of Trustees, identified the real need to tear down the wooden wing on the back of the building because it was a fire hazard, and reconstruct a brick wing that would match the rest of the building. Well, in 1935, the Pennsylvania Authority Act was approved and allowed Slippery Rock to apply for nearly $1 million to take care of North Hall, build a new library, they were to name after Albert Mulvey, and also create for the first time a president's residence on campus. And that request for capital funding, if you will, was forwarded on to Harrisburg. And because of this new board member, Emma Guffey Miller, and her connections in Harrisburg and Washington, D.C., Slippery Rock got the money. And the money was awarded in 1936-37. There was a great deal of jubilation when that money came to campus in 1937. Everyone was looking forward to this new major building program. And throughout the summer and into the early fall, great anticipation took place. But what we know is that October 16, 1937, we experienced the largest fire on this campus and the largest fire in the entire Butler County. We're going to show you the aftermath of that fire, but we want you to see the real effect, because this is a massive building. It's a building actually larger than the current North Hall. You see in this particular picture, Main and as chapel, I believe. Yes, the chapel. This picture is taken from the bell tower of Old Main. And you see a turret in the foreground of this picture of Old Main. The next slide, I believe you're going to see the actual fire. And it is narrated. Okay. We decided that it's better for you to see the fire directly. So can they hear that? I'm not sure. You can hear the narration. Keep in mind, this 16 millimeter film was shot in October of 1937, when color film was not available to the regular individual. So I'm going to help you understand the actual film that you're seeing. It actually, the fire started in the south east area of the building, closest to what is now Weisenflue. In that corner, there was an ox being roasted for homecoming weekend and a celebratory event after the annual football game with Westminster College. That ox being roasted in the kitchen dripped fat, which caught fire and started the building. And Horace Hutchison and John Boyd, two individuals on duty in the powerhouse just across the road from North Hall, saw the flames and sounded the alarm for the college fire team brigade and the town fire brigade. Amazingly, not a single woman was injured. It's very difficult to believe that when you see now the portico of North Hall, a 3-story structure that looks like a very tiny Lego building in flames. This fire drew more than 20,000 people from the surrounding counties. And the main campus at the time was filled with people watching the demise of this beautiful building. It burned all day and into the evening and into the next day. And segments of the building were all that were remaining. A staircase here or there. At one time, Old Main was threatened, and you can see students sitting on the roof of Old Main and up in the bell tower to get that better view of North Hall burning. But the roof of Old Main caught fire, and fortunately, the roof was able to be put out, and the students who scampered off the building hanging onto ropes were safely escorted from the roof of Old Main. And this is the aftermath of that beautiful North Hall. Later on that winter, here's Emma Guffey Miller and the newly appointed Charles Miller, no relation, and it's important to note that. They're at the new groundbreaking in 1938. They proceeded with the Pennsylvania Authority Act money and additional money, and they were able to break ground for the largest construction program in the history of the university. North Hall, Maltby Library, the President's Residence, Strain, now Behavioral Science Building, then Strain Science Building, and the wing for secondary education of the McKay Education Building. Those 5 separate buildings were constructed over 1938, 1939, and into early 1940. Let's take a look at your next slide. And this is actually the Slippery Rock Signal, the local newspaper, looking back on 1937, 38, and you see the main story is still a year after the burning of North Hall. This is a great area shot, and you can study this carefully. I'm not sure how much detail you can see, but it shows the early construction in 1938 of North Hall, almost dead center. At 11 o'clock, 10 o'clock to North Hall is the Maltby Building. And if we just go behind the Maltby Building, you will see the President's Residence under construction. Coming back to North Hall, if you go to 3 o'clock, you'll see Strain Science Hall under construction. Back at North Hall, if you go to about 8:30, 9 o'clock, you will see the secondary education wing of McKay Education Building. Imagine that, 5 major construction programs taking place all at once on Slippery Rock's campus, when other campuses in the state system couldn't build one building. How did that happen? Emma Guffey Miller. Emma Guffey Miller had her contacts in the state. Not only was she on the Council of Trustees of Slippery Rock, but she was on the State Board of Education for Pennsylvania, all education, primary, secondary, and post-secondary. She had the connections which delivered the money to do this construction. But that construction was not going to come without entanglements, political entanglements, entanglements that would last for more than 4 decades. The next slide will show you another completion, and you can see now the buildings are not quite done, but nearing completion. And the last slide, you will see North Hall. And you'll see Maltby Building. This is a great shot because it shows so much of the historic part of campus. You'll see Thompson Field here to 1 o'clock of North Hall. If you go to the very end of Thompson Field, you'll see a grove of trees. And in that group of trees is a pond and an entrance to the campus coal mine, which was a deep mine that went into the hillside and spider webbed that entire area. That Slippery Rock was later to purchase, known as the Garlow Farm, in 1956. But now we'll go to Emma Guffey Miller, the woman on the left. The woman on the right, I think many of you, if not all of you, will know it is Eleanor Roosevelt, the wife of Franklin Delano Roosevelt. How did she just happen to connect with Emma Guffey Miller? It was not happenstance at all. Eleanor Roosevelt and Emma Guffey Miller were closest friends. When Emma Guffey Miller was born in 1874, she was raised in the Greensburg area in Westmoreland County, lived in a somewhat rural area. But Emma Guffey Miller did something in the 1890s that very few women did, and that was attend college. She went to Bryn Mawr in 1895 and graduated in 1899. And she was actively involved in many campus activities. But after she graduated from Bryn Mawr, just 3 years later, what does this woman do? But she travels to Japan. And she is actively involved with friends of hers in Japan. And it is there she meets her husband, Carroll Miller. Carroll Miller was a Virginian, an engineer, educated at Stevens Institute. Her and Carroll were engaged, and their oldest son, their first son, was born in Osaka, Japan. They were to have 3 more sons, a set of twins and another single birth. And the 4 of them then resided in America after that several years of time in Japan. Japan was always a favorite area to Emma Guffey Miller. But Emma Guffey Miller began to make connections from the very beginning. In 1910, she was actively engaged for 10 years in the women's suffrage movement. And she became actively involved in the Democratic Party and was the very first woman to receive a vote for nomination of a president of the United States running on a Democratic ticket. And that occurred in 1924 when she nominated Alfred Smith. Well, we know that Smith ran in 24 and 28 and did not win, but in 1932, she cast the nomination for the man who did win, Franklin Delano Roosevelt. And she became very close with Franklin and Eleanor at that point in time. And throughout the next 4 decades was actively engaged in political activity. Now, we know that she came to Slippery Rock University as a member of the Council of Trustees in 1934, just 2 years after she nominated FDR. Here you see one of the many invitations that Emma Guffey Miller received to the White House, to the Senate building, the Capitol, and to a number of other areas in Washington, D.C. In the 1930s, her brother, Joseph Guthrie, ran and won one of the two senatorial seats for Pennsylvania. And that certainly did not hurt Emma Guthrie Miller's connection. It was actually Emma Guthrie Miller who helped her brother get elected. It was not her brother who helped Emma Guthrie Miller. If we go on, you'll see other invitations. And I want to pause at this time and simply say, I know there's a number of students listening in. If you're doing research projects, if you're interested in the history, not only of the great United States, but of this wonderful university, take time to talk with Judy Silva in the library, in the archives, and Kevin McClatchy in the archives as well. They have a wonderful, wonderful collection of historical memorabilia that is significant to your research. Take time to seek them out and enjoy what you find in the archives. If we go to the next area, this happens to be Jacqueline Kennedy thanked Emma Guthrie Miller for her sympathy letter that Emma wrote when JFK was assassinated. Let's go to the next one. But it was not only important people to whom Emma Guthrie Miller wrote or from whom she received. This is actually a letter to my dad. My dad was Emma Guthrie Miller's postman. My dad was a rural mail carrier for Route 3 in which Emma Guthrie Miller lived. See, in addition to having property in Westmoreland County, Emma Guthrie Miller, coming from colonial and Revolutionary War stock, loved history of Western Pennsylvania. And she realized it was the Kooskooskie Indians and other segments of the Delawares that settled in our area centuries before the white man. And that she had a great appreciation and a tremendous knowledge of the Native Americans. She also knew that one of the major peace treaties in Western Pennsylvania signed between the white settlers and the Native Americans took place on the banks of Wolf Creek. That property was purchased by the Miller family, and Emma Guthrie Miller lived on the farmhouse for several decades. And it was actually there that I met Emma Guthrie Miller. I happened to be 10 years old. Now, that's more than 50 years ago. What happened to me when I was 10, I don't recall at all. But I recall meeting Emma Guthrie Miller. I was riding with my dad that afternoon in the summer. Emma Guthrie Miller's mailbox was one of the last ones we had, so it was hot, I was tired, and I was helping my dad in whatever way I could. As we pulled up to the Emma Guthrie Miller farmhouse, I went to open the mailbox.
Why did you get that sensor light? We all walked up to
In the mailbox, and we ended up noticing a large black automobile in the driveway of the farmhouse. My dad looked at that and smiled, and he looked back to me, and I said, "Dad, what is that?" My dad said, "That's a limousine that belongs to Eleanor Roosevelt." And if you look up on the porch, Bob, you'll see two women sitting there in the rocking chairs on the porch. The woman on the left is Emma Guthrie Miller, and the woman on the right is Eleanor Roosevelt. Why don't you take Mrs. Miller's mail up to her, mind your manners, and excuse yourself as you step in front of Mrs. Roosevelt? And I did. I was happy to get the mail route over with, and anything I could do to speed up the process was certainly welcome. So I ran up the driveway, checking out that large Cadillac limousine as I went past. I had never seen a limousine. In the 1950s, they didn't come through Slippery Rock very often. So I jumped up on the porch, excused myself as I stepped in front of Eleanor Roosevelt, and I said, "Mrs. Miller, here's your mail." Emma Guffey Miller looked at me and she said, "Well, you must be John's boy." And I said, "Yes, I am. I'm Bob." And with the strangest, weirdest, unusual, deeply socketed eyes, she looked at me and said, "Well, it's nice to meet you, Bob." I had nightmares for weeks. I would wake up seeing those eyes of this woman that I just couldn't get past. My dad and mom, when they were living, would tell me that they were really concerned because I would wake up screaming. And it was not just a week or so later, it was months later. I was still seeing those eyes in my dreams or nightmares. You're going to have a chance to see those eyes. And many women who have lived in Norfolk have seen those eyes. Let's go on to the next slide, please. Emma Guffey Miller, often dressed in black, quite often had a hat on. It was very fashionable most of her life. Here she is laying the cornerstone with Norman Weisenslu, cornerstone of Rhodes Hall, just adjacent to the president's residence. Emma Guffey Miller was, whenever there was a Democratic governor, Emma Guffey Miller was on the board of trustees of Slippery Rock State Teachers College, State College, and University. Let's go to the next scene. I want to show you very quickly the presidents that Emma Guffey Miller worked with. She was only on the board a few weeks until she put forth a recommendation for J. Linwood Eisenberg to be replaced. 17 years, this individual who had national notoriety, personal friends like William Jennings Bryan and others, was asked to step aside. J. Linwood Eisenberg, excellent. The next, Charles Miller, and everybody said, "Oh yeah, one of Emma Guffey Miller's relatives." No relation whatsoever. Charles Miller came to us and in 1934 and stayed until 1940. And guess what? He was asked to leave by Emma Guffey Miller. The next slide. This is one of the few presidents in Emma Guffey Miller's era that actually was not asked to leave. Dale McMaster became president in 1940, and in November of 1941, committed suicide in the president's residence. In that room today, when I walk into it, over the years, it still is a very haunting feeling to know that the president of this institution committed suicide there. The next president, please. This individual, John Entz, was beloved by the students, faculty, and staff. He had been here for more than 15 years before he was asked in 1941 to step in for the Dale McMaster. John Entz saw this institution through World War II. before Emma Guffey Miller convinced him he was too old for the job and was asked to leave. Next was our only Butler County resident to serve thus far as president, Dale Houck, born in Bruin, 1946 to 1956, served. Emma Guffey Miller suggested to him in 1956 that he leave because he wasn't effective in her estimation. She walked into the president's office at one day and said, "Dale, I think you need to leave. You've spent the time." Dale Houck responded toe-to-toe with Emma Guffey Miller and said, "You don't have the authority to do that. You are one member of the Council of Trustees, and it takes a majority vote to remove the president." With that, Emma Guffey Miller posted a sign in Old Main that said, "Public meeting, Council of Trustees, tomorrow, 2 p.m. And at that meeting, Emma Guffey Miller moved that Dale Houck be replaced. And Dale Houck was removed from the presidency. 1956, Norman Weisenflute came in. Now, Norman was already here. He was also beloved by faculty, staff, and students. Norman was a wonderful man by the accounts of so many. But Emma Guffey Miller thought Norman was too old and told him that. Norman Weisenflute came to us in 1956 at a time when we were needing so much and the way to move into what was going to be the new era of Slippery Rock State College in 1960. We left the State Teachers College name and developed a multi-purpose institution. And for the first time in our history, Bachelor of Arts degrees. And it was Norman Weisenflute that Emma Guffey Miller did not have confidence in. She recommended that Norman take a sabbatical leave. Why don't you take a trip to Europe and enjoy life while you still can? Norman Weisenflute did just that. And while crossing the Atlantic Ocean on ship with his wife, Norman received a Western Union telegram that he had been replaced as president. Emma Guffey Miller, by this time, was known to many of the faculty, staff, and I'm sure to students as well. Townspeople very well. She was known as the Hatchet Woman. When Emma Guffey Miller came on board, someone was usually going to leave. Before Robert Scriven Carter came on board, this is now in the 1960s, 1964, 65. After Weisenflute was replaced, he was replaced with an interim president, a man by the name of John Edwards. John was promised the presidency by Emma Guffey Miller. So John moved into the president's house, and his family, two of his children, I attended high school with. The vote for John Edwards to be made permanent president took place, and by a 5-4 vote, Edwards was not appointed president. Emma Guffey Miller was starting to lose some of her authority. She was extremely upset. She discussed and debated with the Council of Trustees, and they took a second vote, and it didn't come out any different. So John Edwards was asked to leave the interim presidency, and they would search for a new president. Well, that news didn't go down well with Dr. Edwards. In fact, when the representative from the Council of Trustees went to the president's home to tell Dr. Edwards he and his family would have to vacate the home, his response was very clear. I was promised this presidency by Emma Guffey Miller, and I'm not leaving. Now, that created a difficult situation in the president's residence. We had a person who was no longer the president living in the president's residence. He was asked on several occasions to leave, and Emma Guffey Miller, even herself, communicated with John. Unfortunately, through shutting off the power, the electricity, the heat, light, and water, the Edwards left the president's home. Robert Scriven Carter was selected, a strong liberal arts educated individual, Bachelor of Arts, Master of Arts, PhD in psychology. He came in 1964. There was considerable unrest at this point in time. In fact, for the first time in the history of the institution, the students were voicing their concern. And Robert Scriven Carter, at his inauguration in 1965, invited the president of Denison University, came and spoke, and the title of his inaugural address for Carter was New Beginnings. Well, there were new beginnings occurring outside the inauguration area. And that very week, Robert Carter was hung in effigy in the president's front lawn. There were more than 500 students of the slightly more than 2,500 total enrollment in that president's residence discussion between the president and 500 students. A very difficult time, very difficult. Robert Carter, when he was interviewed by the Butler Eagle and the Pittsburgh newspapers about this event that occurred on his front lawn, responded by saying, "Oh, it's spring, and students are always active in spring." Unfortunately, retrospectively, Robert Carter really did not have much of a relationship with the students. And over the next weeks, the protests continued and increased. KDKA, for the first time, the television channel in Pittsburgh, came to campus and saw hundreds of students carrying placards around Old Main and around the president's residence. Emma Guffey Miller recommended to Robert Carter that he should probably leave. But she had such mixed feelings in this because she did not want him to leave, but she knew the rest of the board really did. So they didn't act on Carter's request for resignation right away. They waited a couple of weeks. To show you how political the campus had become, when they finally accepted Carter's resignation, they did so with the understanding that his two wishes would be recognized and initiated by the Board of Trustees. His first recommendation was that his assistant, and whom he felt he could not trust, be fired. And the board fired that individual. And secondly, almost unbelievably, Carter did not get along with the chairperson of the English department. And great animosity between the two. And he asked to have the chairperson of the English department fired as well. Now, I simply say this to show this entanglement over the period from 1934 to now the late 1960s. Emma Guffey Miller was involved in almost every one of those situations. Let's go to the next one. So that brings us back to North Hall. You know a little bit about the power and the authority of Emma Guffey Miller. You know a little bit about the history of this beautiful building, which we're in. There's one thing you need to know as we talk about the Spirit, and that is above the entry door of North Hall, even you will see a wrought iron railing on the second floor of the window that is directly above the entry door to North Hall. It was in that window, behind that wrought iron railing, that in 1938, Emma Guffey Miller led the Council of Trustees into that room and had them look over the beautiful campus that she and others were creating. It was a sight to behold. There was no Miller Auditorium at that time. You had the beautiful West Hall, which was the model school now Ruth Rizza. You then had Old Main, you had North Hall, you had the beautiful chapel, you had South Hall, and then you had the West Gym. It was a beautiful panoramic scene from Main Street. And there, in that second floor balcony window, Emma Guffey Miller uttered words that will never be forgotten. She turned to the Council of Trustees behind her and she said, "Look at this beautiful campus and this beautiful building. I love this place and I don't think I will ever leave." Two people very close to me in my upbringing were present to hear those words. For years, it was somewhat a joke. But then in the late 1970s and early 1980s, shortly after Emma Guffey Miller's death in February of 1970, and Emma Guffey Miller died in Grove City United Community Hospital at 95 years of age. She stayed in and around Slippery Rock the vast majority of her life. She loved this place and she would never leave. The late 1970s and early 80s, I'm doing research now as a young administrative staff member and faculty member on this campus. And Alumni Weekend was always a big event. And So in June, Alumni Weekend, I set up a table in the late 70s, in the early 80s, as I was trying to bring research into my book, The History of Slippery Rock University, to conclusion, and published that book with the Alumni Association, which published in 1982. I set up a table with a sign that said, "Do you have any personal story you want people to know about your experience at Slippery Rock University?" And I heard wonderful stories from wonderful alums, all kinds of endearing communications from their heart and soul. And then one young woman came to me and said, "Has anyone said anything strange occurring in North Hall? Have you ever heard?" She said, I'm even embarrassed to suggest this, but has anybody ever said anything that happened in North Hall that was kind of weird? And I said, "No, not at all. But did something happen to you?" And she said, "Oh, yes, it did. Yes, it did." And you could see in that young woman's eyes, she was taken back to a time in North Hall that a significant emotional event occurred for her. I want to tell you that account so that you can understand what was the very first account I was shared by that young woman. The first of what is now more than 100 over 40 years. This young woman said, "Well, I was living in North Hall, and it was the weekend, and my roommate had gone away." And she said, "It was the mid-1970s, and I was sitting in bed, actually, in my room late that night on a Saturday night. I was wanting to read one more chapter of a homework assignment before I went to sleep." And she said it was the fall and it had been a nice day. The air was getting cool. And so I shut my window in the room and I sat with my back against the head of the bed, the covers kind of pulled up around me, and I was snuggled up reading the book when something very strange happened. She said, I felt a cold breeze over the back of my neck and around my head. And I immediately thought, I must not have closed the window. So I threw back the covers and jumped out of bed, went to the window, and it was shut and locked. And the door to the hallway was closed. I thought it odd, but I jumped back in bed and pulled up the covers and set to read my book again. And she said, the breeze came back. Enough this time to cause me to wonder. And I looked up in my room because I had only the reading light beside my bed on. The light overhead was not on. I looked across the room and my closet door began to open. And I couldn't believe my eyes. I could not understand what was happening. It opened a foot, 2 feet, 3 feet, until I could see into the closet. And there she was, standing on the threshold of my closet door. Was this woman dressed in black with a black hat, and she had a veil over her face. I couldn't see distinctly, but I could make out enough of her facial features to see that she was an elderly woman, 5 feet tall or so, dressed entirely in black. And her very pale face came through the veil. But she said, what just tormented me were those eyes. Those eyes, I could see them staring at me. She said, I was scared to death. I threw the book off the floor, and as I started to pull up the covers, I said, please leave me alone, please. And I pulled the covers over my head, and I slid down in bed, and I started to cry. I didn't know what to do. She said about 5 minutes later, I peeked out from underneath the covers, and my closet door was shut, and the image or figure was gone. I jumped out of bed. I opened the door into the hallway, ran down the hallway, and yelled for anybody who was there that Saturday night. And a couple of the girls came out, and I said, did you see her? Did you see her? And they said, what are you talking about? She said, that was my first encounter. I have no idea who that person was. I have no idea why she was in my room. I sat there and I said, if I showed you some photographs of women associated with this institution, do you think you would recognize now, these years later? She said to me, as she stared at me and said, I will never forget those eyes and that figure. So my office at the time was in the multi-building. I ran over and pulled a file of photographs I was using in my research and came back, sat down with her, and I shared a picture of Margaret Rhodes. No, that's not her. Shared a picture of Matilda Bailey. No, that's not her. Shared a picture of Lois Harner. Now, Lois was a dark-haired woman, very short in stature and very thin. Physically, somewhat similar to Emma Guppy Miller, but certainly not in facial features. She looked at Lois Harner and she said, no. And then I shared the iconic photo that been seen so much. A photograph that was actually given to me by Leila Vincent, who was on the Council of Trustees for many years And while Emma Miller was a staunch old school Democrat, Leila Vincent was a staunch Republican conservative, but yet best of friends. They dined together, they shared together. Emma Guffey Miller's husband had passed by this time. Leila Vincent's husband, A.P. Vincent, after whom Vincent Science Hall is named, had passed. Leila Vincent's maiden name is Watson. Leila Vincent is my aunt. Leila gave me a number of things that Emma Guffey Miller had given her over the years as they shared on the Council of Trustees together. I pulled out the photograph showing Emma Guffey Miller and Eleanor Roosevelt, and I set it down in front of that young woman alumna, and she burst into tears. That is her. That is her. She went on to explain to me after she settled down that she had several accountings of Emma Guffey Miller. Never mean, never a word was uttered by the image or the spirit. She said that she saw Emma Guffey Miller often as she would get ready for bed at night, stand in front of her mirror and brush her beautiful long hair. And in the mirror where she was looking at her hair, she would see an image come behind the shoulder of her, and it was Emma Guffey Miller's face. Interestingly, over the next 40 years, that was a similar account that I heard from dozens of women in North Hall. Clearly, Emma Guffey Miller had this strong desire not to communicate, but to be present with young women in North Hall, oftentimes as they were brushing their hair. Some women said that they would brush their hair and literally feel Emma Guffey Miller's fingers going through their hair as they were brushing. Oftentimes, women talked of brushes, hairbrushes disappearing from the room. Dozens of hairbrushes over a period of 40 years could not be found after a sighting with Emma Guffey Miller. Now, I have to tell you, early on, I really didn't believe this stuff. Until a couple of situations, very personal situations, happened to me. I want to share just one with you, and I know I want to hear from some of you who have had situations occur to you in North Hall, because it continues, folks. The only thing is, I've yet to hear, since men are now permitted to live in North Hall, because for years it was affectionately referred to as the convent because it was a woman's only residence hall. But I've never heard an accounting from a young man of a sighting of Emma Guffey Miller. Here's one more thing to remember. Those of you who doubt this, of the 100+ sightings and accounts that have been told to me over 40 years, every single one of those communicated sincerely and felt to be in truth. 90% of those sightings occurred in one of two rooms in North Hall. Is that coincidence? I don't think so. Only 10% of the sightings of Emma Guffey Miller reported to me occurred outside of those two rooms. And I made the grave mistake about 15 years ago when we had in this very room, fireplace room, more than 200 women here to hear the story of Emma Guffey Miller. They begged me to tell them the room numbers, and I had never divulged them, and I said that I would not. But they persisted and they persisted. And I then identified the two room numbers. The result was disastrous because the women living in those two rooms would not go back to the room that night. There was no way they were going back to the rooms that night because each of them had already had sightings of Emma Guffey Miller in that room. Some were freshmen, some were upperclassmen, but they had already had sightings and they were not going back into that room. Well, the problem was compounded because the campus residence halls were full. We had nowhere for these women who wouldn't go back to those rooms to actually go. So the director of housing communicated with me the next day, not very happy with the fact that I had communicated to the young women which two rooms those were. Now, his room numbers have changed since that time in North Hall. They've renumbered rooms because they've restructured the interior. Will not communicate the rooms. 90% of the sightings occurred in those two rooms. I want to tell you briefly about my personal experience. It occurred in the second floor of North Hall. This is at a time approximately 20 years ago. And men were not permitted in North Hall. So as I went to the second floor with the resident hall, it was the statement issued, man in the hall, to let the women who were living there know that there was a man there and they had to dress appropriately. Well, we advertised that we would do the haunting of North Hall in the little common room above the steps that go up from the main entryway here on the second floor. Right in the second floor landing, there's a common area, and it would house safely probably 75 people. We had at least 75 people that night, and it was around Halloween like this. And I was there with a slideshow and a 16 millimeter projector because at that time I was showing the burning of North Hall on the original 16 millimeter film that I had found in a dumpster some years prior. There were 4 different things that happened that night that convinced me Emma Guffey Miller's spirit resides in North Hall. We had turned off the overhead light and we had 2 or 3 table lights lit so that enough that I could see how to run the projector and enough to not freak out the young women. And I was no more than 30 seconds into the presentation and every single table light went dark. Now, these are the table lights that you had to turn on or off by hand at the light. And there were either 2 or 3 of those lights on at that time. The only way for them to go completely dark at the same time was someone had to be at each lamp and choreograph the turning off of the lamp so that all of the lamps went dark in that room. But let me tell you, 30 seconds into that presentation, when those lamps went dark, that room went dark, and there were 75 to 100 young women who were frightened considerably. I was rather amused by it because I thought there were 3 girls who were standing there turning the lights off just to get me going. So after we got one of the lights back on, I said, okay, who turned off the lights? And I'm looking around to see if those who turned off the lights would volunteer, but not one person said a word. And then the residence hall coordinator said to me, Dr. Watson, there was no one standing by any of the lights. We don't know why they went off. That was odd. So I went on with the slide presentation, and I came to the iconic slide photograph of Emma Guffey Miller and Eleanor Roosevelt, the one that you've seen here. And all of a sudden, my slide projector would not go forward and would not go backward. Now, that was more a concern to me and a nuisance because I had the rest of the presentation to do, and I didn't know what I was going to do. But the young women realized I was trying to go forward and backward, and I could not get off the slide of Emma Guffey Miller. And that caused them a bit of consternation. Finally, I shut down everything in the projector, took the carousel out, repositioned it manually, and I was able to move on. Then came the 16 millimeter film of the fire. We were probably 1 minute into the showing of that film. And I was showing it against a plain, flat wall surface that was light colored so that you could see the film quite well. And there was no narration at that point. I was narrating it. And as the blaze erupted more and more and the smoke billowed into the skies, one of the young women in the room said, "Is it me? Or does anybody else smell smoke?" And immediately there was, "No, I smell it. I smell it. I smell the smoke. I smell the smoke. This building's on fire." Trying to calm everybody, I said, "The building's not on fire." And all of a sudden, I could clearly smell the smoke of what smelled an electrical fire. And I think those of us who have smelled an electrical fire understand that it's a different smell than wood smoke or something else. And I could clearly smell electrical fire. So we actually evacuated all of North Hall. The next day, after everyone went back to the room safely, and that presentation was cut shortly. The next day, Jimmy Leone, who was the head electrician for the university at that time, came and checked every single outlet to find out why those lights apparently shorted and went off. He checked every outlet, he checked every wall switch, and found absolutely nothing. And told me I was crazy if I smelled an electrical fire. But I smelled it. And every one of those 75 to 80 or more women in that room that night, they also witnessed the lights go black. And they also witnessed the carousel projector freezing on Emma Guffey Miller's. Let's go to this image. Now, this is actually a still shot of the groundbreaking ceremony that you saw. This is Emma Guffey Miller looking over the shoulder of Charles Miller, the then president. You can see she's dressed in black. You can also see she has a black hat on. Very typical for Emma and her regular attire. But you can see her eyes are deep and they're dark. And looking into those eyes when she was living was frightening enough for me. I can only imagine looking into those eyes of a figure in the threshold of your closet in North Hall. The last thing I want to leave you with was, for a period of about 10 to 12 years, I thought it would be really interesting to do this presentation of Emma Guffey Miller in the fireplace room here at 11 o'clock p.m. on Halloween night. And we've had hundreds of young women, and oftentimes their boyfriends or friends, to come in to help them through the process. And the presentation then ended shortly before midnight. And I would take those who volunteered from North Hall, and we would go to the basement of North Hall, which at the time, 25, 30 years ago, was an earthen floor, not cemented. One of those midnight escapades with a group of probably 40 to 50 young women, I led with a flashlight, much like this one, very much like this one. We went into the side entrance, which is the south part of the building. The doorway is still there. Those steps are still there. When I got down into that area to set the atmosphere, we kept the lights off and only flashlight on. Now, I had been in that basement that very morning to just make sure that there was nothing in the passageway that might trip any of us or might be a barrier that we could get injured on. But that night as we went down, all of us, those 40 to 50 who were present, and perhaps there's someone on the Zoom call tonight who was there. But there was something in the floor of the basement of North Hall that I will never forget. In the floor, approximately 30 to 40 feet from the entrance, was a hole in the earth, approximately 6 feet long, approximately 3 feet wide, and approximately 5 feet deep. Now, that hole, to everyone who was there that night, resembled an open grave. I could not explain it to the girls. I tried to laugh it off, but in my mind, I knew that that morning, that hole was not in the floor. So I said, well, let's go on down here to the southeast corner of the building. And that was always an area that I would try to go because it was directly beneath where the Ox started to fire homecoming weekend in 1937, directly beneath the kitchen floor. Well, halfway from that entrance, which we used, to the back end of the southeast corner, halfway, there is a set of about 6 concrete steps, which are still there, leading to nowhere, which always intrigued me. That they put concrete steps out of an earthen floor up into the wall, and there was no doorway or window. But as we passed that evening, residing on those concrete steps, set into the wall, was a figure resembling Emma Guffey Miller. I saw it. Unfortunately, I didn't see it first, or I probably would have turned the young women around and gotten out of the basement. Unfortunately, 6 young women saw it before I did and screamed bloody murder. Now, we had a flashlight at the front of the group, a flashlight in the middle of the group, and a flashlight at the end of the group. It took us a while until we realized why people were screaming. I saw the figure. And the figure I saw that night residing in that area, offset concrete steps along the south wall of North Hall, was the figure you're looking at right now. And then the image was gone. Satisfied that we could move forward, we took the young women who wanted to continue because nearly half of them had decided they were checking out. They were no longer wanting to be in the basement of North Hall after seeing the open grave and the image of Emma in the offset steps. But I took the remaining group back to that southeast corner, directly underneath the kitchen. And even to this day, that area is still there. They used to store produce there. And even in sometimes they would store foodstuffs there. And they had a very interesting kind of setup that there were almost bars on the door to allow for ventilation and everything. But yet when you closed that door, it secured what was inside and kept people from going in, but still allowed ventilation. We went to the back. I was the first one there. I looked in that area, which was directly underneath where the ox had burned. And there was nothing in there that night. Nothing. So I moved past it. 6 young women came and absolutely saw nothing. And we filed to that far corner of the southeast area, and it's very tight quarters. And we figured that we could have maybe, by the time the last group of young women had come past that little area, we would then have enough room that everybody could turn around and file back. But the last group of young women, when they looked inside that area with the bars, it was not empty. And Emma Guffey Miller's figure stood there in all her splendor. Those young women screamed, turned, and ran for the exit door as fast as they could. There were about 8 to 10 women who saw that image in that area. I did not. And those closest to me in the processional of young women did not. But some did. Those three situations, the open hole, the figure on the steps, and the figure inside that sliding area, rang true for me. The next morning, I asked Eddie Leone, who was working on facilities, to go down with me and take a look at this open hole in North Hall. Because when I called him, I said, Eddie, you must have had some of your men dig a hole down in the basement of North Hall. And it almost caused a problem because I didn't know the hole was there. And when I went there yesterday morning, there was no hole. But last night when I went in there, there was this open hole about 6 feet long, about 3 feet wide, and about 5 feet deep. And then it really looked like a grave. And I said, I just want to make sure I go over with you in the morning. I'll show you where it is. You can't miss it. And you need to fill that in, or if you're doing conduit work for electrical or plumbing or something, just know that was there. And over the phone that morning, Eddie said, we didn't dig any hole. I'll go over and meet you there, but we didn't dig any hole. So Eddie and I met, turned on the lights, walked in that basement, and there was no hole. I couldn't even find a place to show where the earth had been disturbed. I can't explain that, folks. I think Eddie thought I was probably losing my mind. But I can tell you, after 40 years and more than 100 of accounts communicated to me, I am absolutely certain that Emma Guffey Miller's spirit resides in North Hall. Remember, folks, she loves this place and she will never leave. If any of you have any comments or questions or accounts that you would like to share, I would love to hear those. I understand there's a number of you in this Zoom call, so I know it makes it so difficult, and I really wish you were here. I would love to hear your accounts face to face, with or without our masks. But the one thing I do want to say is, my email is robert.watson@sru.edu. It's very easy, first name dot last name @sru.edu. And I just looked at the registration of the more than 150 people who had registered for this, and I recognized names and graduation dates and so on. And I know some of you were here and experienced something. And I would love to hear that. I'd love to know that. And I just want to say, I know Jude Butch is zoomed in here, or was. And Jude, you were in North Hall. I know you were for some of those sessions. And I'm sure you probably were in North Hall at times you shouldn't have been in North Hall as well. But Jude and so many others have been through these experiences. And so thank you so much for being part of this. Kelly and I are still 10 to 12 feet apart here and socially distant, even though she's got a mask on and I'm talking without a mask. But I would be happy to address any questions or answer anything you might have.
I'm going to add in, Bob, just see, I'm watching the chat feature here. We've got a couple sightings here that I kind of want to bring to everyone's attention from the chat room. Bradley, who's a current student, had a door on the third hall common room that would close on its own when he was making music. And
this is a young man.
And it would happen when he was alone in the room later at night, and also what happened to his friend Steve. So he's wondering if you think that, have there been any sightings in the third floor? Of course, we have a number of people who want to know what room it is. And I understand. I don't know if I gotta tell you, I'm in the building right now.
Sorry,
I don't want to know.
I just can't go there. Patrick Bestwick would have my backside, that's for sure. But let me dig into this situation that Steve, was it?
Well, it's Bradley.
Bradley?
It's Bradley, yeah.
Okay, Bradley, what is the current room number where you were experiencing situations? Because again, rooms have changed, but I do know the renumbering system. So I just like to know that.
It wasn't specifically in one of the numbered rooms. It was just in one of the common rooms that was on that floor.
The
It was always
common
when I was
rooms.
sitting there. Yeah.
And could you describe specifically what you experienced?
I would never personally see her, but what would happen every now and then is that the door, with no draft whatsoever, would just slowly start to close. Sometimes I would hear it close, sometimes I wouldn't, but I would just be so confused seeing that. And I had heard word of Emma and her apparition before, and I've always been taught when I was younger to just be friendly to whatever spirit is out there. So every time I'd see it, I would just say, hello, how you doing? And I would sometimes joke around and be like, no, I want to keep the door open in case people want to come in and make music with me.
Well,
I never.
And that's certainly good of you and very brave of you, because there are some people who probably would not want to engage Emma. But I can tell you that it's wonderful to hear that, because I'm thrilled that that Emma is not biased here based on gender. I think it's wonderful that she can communicate in one sense or another with both genders. I think it's wonderful that she communicates with women and communicates with men. I can tell you that, and this is a very long story and I won't go into it. I'll just tell you the end of the story, which has been documented by the technology people at the time in North Hall. When we first got the capability to word process and print a document in a residence hall, North had one area of all this building. There was one area where a printer was housed. And if you were working in the system and pressed print, you could then have a term paper, research paper, whatever, printed into that area. So very late one evening, not far from Halloween, a young woman was working, and I know none of you students do this, but she was working the night before the term paper was due. And I know you do this weeks in advance now, but she was doing it at like 2, 3 in the morning. She had an 8 o'clock class that this paper was due. So she was just ramming home an all-nighter, and she was typing up, and so she got to the point that she pressed print, and she went down to the room, and now 99% of North Hall is quiet. Everybody's asleep. She's down there in her little fuzzy slippers walking down the hall, and she gets to the room where they have the printers stored, and nothing's printed. She was disgusted. She went all the way back to her room, figured she did something wrong. She went ahead and pressed print again to have the document printed, walked all the way down again, and still no document. What she did not realize, and the technology crew at the time could not explain it, but that her research paper was being printed. It was being printed in Riviera Hall across Main Street, which then was called Krause Hall. And on their printer, her term paper came up. Now, she had no understanding of that until the next day, because her name and everything was on the title page. And so the resident hall coordinator from Krause Hall brought the term paper over to North Hall, where she was able to receive it and take it back to her professor, albeit a few hours late. But the technology people said that that was impossible because it was a closed system within each residence hall. So that night, that next night, that young lady figured Emma had some role in this. So about 2 to 3 a.m. in the morning, she got up, logged on the system, and she thought she'd have a little fun with Emma. She logged on and typed, "Hello, Emma. How are you?" And pressed print. She walked down to the room which housed the printer for North Hall. And there was a single sheet of paper which she anticipated to have on it, "Hello, Emma. How are you?" With this little smart aleck sarcastic nature. There was a sheet of paper, and it had printing on it. It said, "I'm quite well, Catherine. How are you?"
Okay, now that I'm completely freaked out here, Betsy Stevens had put in a note. Betsy works here in North Hall, and a couple of years ago, we did this program during Alumni Weekend. And we had, I'm guessing it's the same individual who works, one of our amazing housekeepers here on campus, very tentatively, if you remember, Bob, approached you and I after we were done with the program, and she shared that she had seen within the past 2 years the full-on apparition of Emma in one of the upstairs bathrooms. So it is not something that we believe here on campus. It's, even if you don't believe in ghosts, I think we all believe in Emma and her spirit that love us. Does anyone else have any stories they want to share? If so, you can take your mic off.
While you're thinking, I want to share one thing, and some of you fairly new alums, young alums, may remember this. When Bob Smith was president, I retired the first time in 2006. Shortly thereafter, Bob Smith, through working with the students wanted a paranormal organization to come and check this place out. And they were absolutely certain that Emma Guffey Miller's spirit was hanging around and engaging students. And unfortunately, when they did the contract with the company, I believe it was from Titusville, area, a paranormal group who came down and set up infrared imaging and all kinds of motion detectors and really cool stuff. But they set it up in Miller Auditorium because they thought that Emma Guffey Miller would hang around in Miller Auditorium, which is the building she was honored and therefore bears her name. So they set up all of this technology. It took them a couple days, and they came away and they found a couple things, but not much. And I understand there are some issues, some situations going on in Miller Auditorium. I'm very much aware of a woman who persistently cries and moans, but it's a younger woman. And I'm also aware of a baby persistently crying, and it might be a mother and a child that are separated. I'm not sure about, and I understand that there are occasionally some outbursts where certain pieces of equipment fall or are damaged or whatever. But I wish when they had contracted that, and when I saw that group was coming, I called Bob Smith and said, Bob, we're working the wrong facility here. We got to get that group of people to North Hall. They're not going to find much in Miller, and what they find, I guarantee you, is not Emma Guffey Miller. Emma loves North Hall. So I said, we've got to either get them to do a second venue or come back at another time. Well, the problem was they could only do one venue at a time. They never got to North Hall. So North Hall has not been assessed in a sense of paranormal activity.
Bob, this is Dan Brown, Director of Housing now. Can you hear me all right?
I'm sorry?
It's Dan Brown, Director of Housing
Oh,
right now.
Dan Brown.
He's going
For
to.
years, I've been wanting to hear this, so I'm glad Zoom gave me the opportunity. But earlier in the year, one of our male housing staff was running rooms, and all the rooms were propped open. And he calls and says, "Hey, there's a door. Is anybody up here? I heard a door slam." And I said, "No." I said, "Probably just one of the, door stops came out. No big deal." So he walked back around and called again and said, "None of the door stops are out. I walked through everything. It slammed behind me, kind of on that back corner over the kitchen, second floor." And it happened again. He goes, "Has to be here."
When was this, Dan?
Well, maintenance wasn't there because everybody was off for COVID. We were the only ones on campus with rooms. There wouldn't have even been maintenance staff, admission staff at that time. I was in Watson Hall, but it was just, doesn't really buy into that stuff. But on the second time he heard it, he said, "I think I'm going to leave for today." And I said, so that's one of our stories that was into the COVID era that I said to Joe, she must have been lonely.
Well, that is very interesting, Dan. And I just wonder, I said this to Kelly earlier this evening. I just wonder how Emma is affected by the absence of a lot of women in North Hall. And I wonder how she's affected. I wonder how she's impacted by this whole thing that we're doing tonight by Zoom. I don't know if she likes this. I don't know if she doesn't like this. I don't know how we'll find out, but I guarantee you one thing, we will find out at some point in time. It's very rare that she does not express herself. And the other thing is, when I say that, I want to emphasize she does at least none of the 100+ sightings, none of them have ever said they heard words uttered. And none of them, well, I take that back. Most of them have never been anything but amicable in the contact. There was one young woman who felt that Emma got a little rough with her hair because she apparently made some disparaging remark to her when she saw this image in the mirror behind her one night. And she had mentioned that she had some alcoholic beverage that might have been speaking instead of her. And she made a comment to Emma, and she swears that Emma pulled her hair hard enough to pull her to the ground. And that's all that I have ever heard in terms of, I mean, Emma loves long hair, like Kelly's. Kelly, show the length of your hair. She loves long hair. And I can tell you, I've heard
I'm
from at
freaked
least 50 women who have said that they have felt Emma's fingers in their hair. So
I'm sufficiently freaked out at this point. Yeah.
I just want everybody to know that after I'm finished here tonight, I'm going to leave by myself, and Kelly has volunteered to go to the basement and spend the rest of the night in the basement by herself. And so we're all hoping that she is able to send an email tomorrow morning to us to let us know how it went.
And Rachel Lombardo, I think you said you wanted to join me in the basement. So I'm expecting you in about 6 hours, I would think, from Virginia to here. So Rachel, you get in your car and I'll be waiting for you.
Yeah. See, I'm intrigued, and I'm also terrified. I love hearing these stories. I love learning, and going on tours and things like that. But it's like I want to see her. I want that experience. But I don't know how I'd handle it. I really don't.
That goes
Well, I'd recommend if you're an alum, if there is ever an opportunity for you to come back for alumni weekend or some event, you can stay in North Hall. If you can arrange to have your overnight accommodation in North Hall, I'm sure if you maybe I could kind of guide you in the right direction for your overnight accommodation selection, and you perhaps could have your own personal account.
Yeah, I'll be in touch with you about that one. I'll send you an email. We'll see how brave I am.
Let's hope it doesn't print at Krause, which is now like gone. So that would be a real feat since the building is Krause, or Riviera is no longer. But
yeah.
Yes, absolutely. Definitely. Definitely think. And as Betsy was pointing out too, Bob, and I think we can probably kind of point out the pic that was used to break the ground, and a picture of Emma are within this space of North Hall. So if you are on campus and you want to come in, this section is typically open during the day. The Medal of Honor room for anyone who wants to learn more about our wonderful alums who have served, received medals of honor for their service within the military is also in this space, and as well as admissions. So if you know someone who would like to come to Slippery Rock as well, this is a great place where everything really gets started. So this space is open to campus. It's beautifully refurbished. It's very much restored to it. It's a very wonderful, and we host a couple of events here during Alumni Weekend. There's a gorgeous courtyard outside when the weather's nice. So this is a program we do during Alumni Weekend late at night at that 11 o'clock hour. So you can come in and we can tell ghost stories. It has a different operating title during Alumni Weekend. I joke it's booze and booze. So it's different. We normally have a couple adult beverages to get us through the evening. Students, when you're alumni, you're welcome to join us for that portion too. Are there any other questions for Dr. Watson?
I would recommend that if you're on campus or can return to campus, spend a half an hour or an hour in the archives, in the library, and you can get a great deal. Is that Judy? Wait. Hey, Judy. You can get a great deal of information about Emma Guffey Miller in the archives and some wonderful photographs. And they have the history of the university that can really be brought to life for individuals. And were you going to do anything
Sure.
one way or the other with those?
Sure. How do you want to
Okay.
do that? I think Brad gets one for telling us this
Okay.
scary story.
Good. We,
So we have some giveaways here tonight for 3 lucky people. We've immediately decided that Bradley, who has had the most recent of haunting experiences, is going to be a winner. So Bradley, are you on campus?
I am not, unfortunately. I wish I were.
Okay, well, don't worry about that. That's not a big deal. We have a history book for you, which is the history of Slippery Rock University. Bob Watson has authored this book, and we will send it to you in the mail. No worries. So since you've had the most recent experience, we will make sure to get you a copy. We also have 2 others for some lucky alumni. And I'm taking a peek at the thing here right now. I think the first person with a spooky story gets one. So does anyone else have a spooky story for us to share?
I do. I'm Sophia's sister, Mackenzie Walker. I graduated in 2016 now.
Okay, Mackenzie.
It's not for North Hall. I lived in A sophomore and junior year. And my roommate and I shared a room, and we were laying in bed. We were just about to go to bed, and we hear our shower turn on. And we both sit up and look at each other like, is that really the shower? And as I said, is that the shower? It turned off. So my roommate was more brave than I and got out and went to the shower. And in fact, it had been on because it was wet. And we didn't sleep that night very well.
Oh my goodness. That would terrify me too. I'm very much a scaredy cat, so that would absolutely terrify me. All right. Next scary story also is a winner. Does anyone else have one they like to share? I'm looking at the profile here.
I have one from Harner Hall back in 1985. There was a room on the first floor. When you walked in and you went up the stairs to the right, my next door neighbor, her room was always frigid. Like it was cold in there. Like in the winter, it was just freezing. We were all in shorts and t-shirts because, you know, the heat was just not managed. And she was always freezing. And then one time we did the Ouija board in her room and it moved like crazy. And I don't remember like all the details because that was so long ago, but it was really scary and creepy.
Oh my goodness. That is, you know, there are so many, I guess when you're over 100, when you're 132 years old, you do have some, it sounds like legitimate skeletons in the closet around here. Peyton, Mackenzie, and
actually this that's my son's screen name. He used my computer earlier. This is my name's Aileen Will, AILEEN Will.
Aileen, you're down in North Carolina, right?
Beaufort. Yep. Mm-hmm.
Okay, I thought so. I think we've met before, so I will make sure to get that in the mail for you tomorrow.
Oh, thank you so much.
No problem. So you, Brad, Aileen, and you guys can brush up on your history, and we will see what else comes out of the woodwork. But thank you.
Tell them they can, if anyone does want the book, they can order it through the bookstore.
Yes, absolutely. And you can also, if you also are interested in having a copy of the book, the bookstore does have it available, and that's bookstore. If you do a quick Google search or right off the SRU homepage, you can link to our bookstore, which has amazing merchandise, of course. So,
Hey,
Yes.
stop. Sorry.
I don't know if that was from you or not, but I will resume. But thank you guys all for coming. A special thank you for Dr. Watson for getting us in the Halloween spirit this evening. We are so grateful to have this wealth of information, and it's great when history and tradition intermix. And we've got a lot of great traditions here on campus, and Emma is but one of them. So please join us for all of the virtual events we have coming up. We've got a great Kahoot trivia night scheduled. So if you like to play some Slippery X trivia and win some great prizes, our next one is on November 12th. And we also have our next alumni speaker series the night before on November 11th. Rachel Bracht from the class of 97 is going to be talking about making success happen through your strategic network. And she's an awesome alumna who will be speaking to us as well. So keep in touch with us. We can't wait to hear from you. If you're not a member, please join the Alumni Association. That helps all of our programming and keeping it going. And be sure to always keep Slippery Rock near and dear on Fridays. I expect everyone in green and white tomorrow. A rock solid Go Rock to all of you. And I look forward to hopefully seeing you all in person soon.
Thank you to everyone. Thank you.
Have a
And-
great night.
Something you want me to know, send it to the robert.watson@sru. Thank you.
Thank you, Bob. That was amazing.
Thanks, Kelly.
Thank you.
Thanks, Kelly.
Thanks, Judy. It's good to see you.
Great job.